Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Committee of the Whole meeting on April 11th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and just have one announcement that just want to thank everybody out there who's participating in the 2020 challenge. I've seen lots of people out cleaning up. And so I just ask you to continue. The community in the valley is looking great. So we just need more people out there picking up garbage and let's get this done before Earth Day. So thank you. Is there any additions to the agenda? Nope. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented, please? Tom?
I move to adopt the agenda for the April 11th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as presented.
Seconder, Stephanie? All in favor? Carried. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes of March 13th, please? Tony?
I move that to approve the minutes for the March 13, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting as presented.
Seconder, Lisa? Comments? All in favor? Carried. All right, let's move down to 6.1, please, and welcome you gentlemen to the council chambers, and I will let you take over from here.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity to be here today. This is really an assessment 101. It's a quick overview of how the town's assessment was prepared, or for that matter, how assessments in the province are prepared. This is Ken Waters. He is an AACI, which is an accredited appraiser Canadian institution title. He's worked over 26 years in this appraisal field. My name is Rod Vixie. I'm an accredited municipal assessor in Alberta. Started back in 1985, 38 years ago. More gray hair now. We were incorporated as a private company in 1995. If you have questions, if you could hold off to the end, it would be appreciated. Lots of them will be answered as I go through the process. Assessment, here we are, yep. Property assessments are used to distribute the municipality's taxes in a fair and equitable manner. Drumheller sets a budget. Wild Rose creates the assessment. From those two, you achieve the mill rate. Now, the MGA defines market value as the amount that a property, as defined, might be expected to realize if sold on the open market by a willing buyer, willing seller. Pretty straightforward. We get sales from land titles. When we get the sales dumped into our office, we delete the poor ones. There's going to be families, divorces, different kind of situations that happen that we remove. They're not true value sales. Market value is very fluid. Everybody has a view of what a property is worth. I look at a property, my wife looks at a property. We don't always agree on what the value is. So if I have a listing of $350,000, 4 offers at $310,000, and one person comes in at $348,000, it sells at $348,000, market is defined $348,000. That means the 4 other people, or 80%, are wrong. It's a very gray area. I want you to keep that example in your mind because I will attend to that later. Next page, please. Mass appraisals, as defined by MRAT, matters relating to assessment and taxation. We have the process of preparing assessments for a group of properties using standard methods. So we value properties as a whole. When Ken was a pure appraiser, he did one property and that's the assessment. As an assessor, we'll take a subdivision, Midlands, and we analyze 21 sales, and the average works out to be where we want it, 50% high, 50% low. But that's how mass appraisal works. If markets are down by 3% overall, it doesn't mean that everything is down 3%. Duplexes can be up 4%. Custom homes can be down 7%. Condos could be up 10%. They're going to fluctuate all over the place. There's an overall average. So if the public gets the impression that things move 2%, if they move 5%, we get phone calls because we're wrong, because they were told it only moves 2%. So we break assessments down by model type, mobile home, duplex, fourplex, etc., and also by market area. What happens in Wayne does not happen in Midland. very different markets. So we have to analyze each area individually and then all the different improvement types within each area separately. What is assessed? So property is assessed. Pretty straightforward. You have a two-number assessment here. You have a land value, an improvement value, your house and your garage, and a total. So my land is worth 80, my improvement is worth 340. Together they're worth $440,000. Some municipalities, and I realize there's a problem with software, have a one-number assessment, because whenever I talk to someone, I ask them what's their property worth. They don't give me a breakdown. They say it's worth $440,000. We assess structures, pretty straightforward, houses, garages on the residential side. Anything attached to the structure, decks, some verandas aren't attached. Designated manufactured homes and machinery and equipment. Now residential, we assess land and buildings, and as I said, we're tied into land titles. That means detached single-family dwellings, semi-detached, condominiums, vacant lots, multifamily. Next, please. Non-residential are commercial, industrial, condominiums. Of those two, on the bottom, there's an interesting one where I list special properties. So when a church sells, a church is a church. If it sells as a Lutheran church and an Anglican church buys it, it gets its premium value. Doesn't always happen. If it doesn't sell as a church use, it then goes to a commercial use typically, and the value drops substantially. If it goes to a residential, it even drops further. So here we'll have an assessment up here, and it ends up selling here, but they're totally different buildings, totally different uses. I'll go through regulated values quite quickly. Machinery and equipment, this is oil field sites. Most of yours is up on the North Ridge. You have a lot of oil field up there, compressors and such. That is now assessed and valued by the province. We do not get any information on that in our office. The information is dropped directly into the town of Drumheller's computer. Farmland is also a regulated number. Houses are market value. Farmland is a regulated value. Government set these rates before I started. And now there's a bit of a problem because they've kept that rate for at least 38 years apparently, and nothing has changed. So now that value has become meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. If they had increased it 2% or 3% per year and kept it going up to today's value, it would at least have some relationship to market value. It's not an issue for you folks so much, but rural municipalities, it is an issue. Power generation, these are assessed. If you notice, the middle one is designated industrial property, or also called a DIP property. That again is the province. They handle all of that by the provincial assessor. You get the information dumped directly into you. Railway, again, not market value, just a fixed number set by the province. Machinery and equipment is also assessed at regulated rates. And the easiest way to describe M&E, or machinery and equipment, is if you have a tree go into a mill and it comes out as a 2x4, everything from the beginning to the end process, all of that is assessable and taxable. Linear property, same thing. All of those which you have, a large part of your assessment is done by the province. And that's done by the province in every municipality. There's not a choice there. Non-assessable and assessable. Non-assessable are municipal water treatment plants as an example. Farm buildings, the farm buildings are exempt from taxation. So they don't pay a penny of tax on a barn if they keep whatever in it for farm operations. However, as soon as that property flips and someone breaks out a 3-acre site and it becomes an acreage, all of those buildings then become live. They're then taxed on it, which will happen in the valley on the occasion. Assessable property, you just fly in there, is residential, and we've discussed which ones, and non-residential. Now, certain properties are exempt from taxation, period. schools, churches, municipal buildings, they're just exempt. We can't tax them. We have to assess them, but you can't tax them. On the very bottom there, there's a nonprofit thrift store. So thrift stores aren't exempt from taxes unless it is granted by council. So there's an act called COPTER, which is Community Organization Property Tax Exemption Regulation, and I had to write that down. And what that is that allows the thrift stores that operate purely as a benefit to the municipality. They're not a profit-driven organization. They can approach you, fill out the proper paperwork, and then they can achieve tax exemption. Property standards. The MGA and matters relating to assessment and taxation, MRAT, define the methods and standards that must be met when assessments are prepared. A property assessment is based on market value and must be prepared using mass appraisal. Now, if you remember the example I gave you with a property that sold for $348, it was listed at $350, whole bunch of $310 offers. If you have one sale, it really kind of skews it. But if I go into Green Tree or somewhere and I have 21 sales, those all flatten themselves out. You know, you're gonna get the high, you're gonna get the low, it'll always happen, but typically it floats pretty close to the middle. And that's where the assessments will end up. And once again, we do that by every classification, mobile home, duplex, fourplex, so it takes a lot of time to get the assessment where it is. We reflect typical market conditions for similar properties that have not sold. So I'll go back to Midlands. I have 21 sales, but I have 200 that didn't sell. So we take those 21 sales, impose what the value should be, and then we measure the distance between the previous assessment and where the new sales tell us, and then we put it on everyone in that community. So property sell, don't sell, you're going to be moving with how the market flows. We're audited yearly to make sure that we do this properly. If we don't, it really skews the assessment and the fairness of assessment. How assessments are prepared. There's two important dates. The first one is December 31st, and that is the date of condition. So if I'm building a house, Christmas time, I'm 25%. When that ratepayer gets their assessment notice, they get 100% land, and they get 25% of the building, because it's only 25% done. They finish it April 1st. April 1st to December 31st, they get a supplementary assessment, which means that they're assessed for the remainder of the building, but nothing for the land because we've already got them on the first go round. So December 29th, the building burns down. It's now a vacant lot on the assessment roll. January 5th, building burns down. Was it there December 31st? It was. That person is paying taxes on their house even though it's gone. July 1st is the valuation date. So when we assess properties, we use July 1st of the previous year to value the base. So July 1st, 2022 is we analyze the market and we say everything is in this little tight box. This is where market value is. You don't send your assessment notices out till another month or two from now. Yeah, somewhere in there. So when they get their notice, market value is already 1 year old from when they get it. And we're telling them it's market value, but it's already 1 year old. And sometimes that's a bit of a difficult hill to push because they don't understand it. It takes a bit of explanation, but we're always 1 year basically behind. Now, if you separate your assessment notice from your taxation notice, that is not the case. So if we turn our assessment roll over to you by the end of January, the faster you get those notices out, the truer that number is, and then you can start setting your mill rate accordingly. Assessment complaints. There are different types of assessment complaints. The first one is the LARB, which is what we had here a few years ago with some residential properties. The composite, which is a commercial one, that has a provincial person come in to take care of the appeal. And the last one is DIP, which we'll never take care of because it's not our assessment. Now, there are different approaches to market value, and I dealt with residential largely and some generalities rather quickly. Ken is going to discuss the commercial side of assessment.
Thank you, Rod. So I deal with the non-residential, which will be the commercial industrial properties and the multifamily properties. There really is, I have to watch Rod to catch the right pages, but there really are two ways that we're going to value a property. It's going to be based on the cost approach most often. And what that's going to be is we're just going to start with the cost new and depreciate for age and condition. What's fantastic about this approach is that we can then use whatever sales we have, and they're very different buildings. So you're going to have a dozen sales maybe, and they're going to be 12 different buildings. What's useful is it shows us the rate of obsolescence we need to apply to achieve market value to put across all the properties that haven't sold. So most times we're doing land, building new, depreciate it, add them together. That's your non-residential assessment. That's most often what we use. Now, the one that gets the most attention would be the income approach. The income approach is when you have a building that its use defines its market value. You've got a multi-tenanted commercial building, you've got an apartment building, maybe you have a single tenanted building that's leased for 10 years. You've got a hotel. All these properties are centered around income. So to do a depreciated cost, not the best way. So every year I send out a request for information. It's called an RFI. It can be, contentious to people for sure. The intention is that I find out in advance if the market value of this property is derived from its lease revenue or if I'm going to use the cost approach. So I'm trying always to find out in advance if someone calls in with a question on the value of their assessment, are we talking about an income approach or a cost approach? So each year we'll send out, and I try to tailor the list to the properties that are really could be an income approach property. I really don't want to value it on the cost approach if the income approach is the best way. So that request for information is pretty detailed. And again, I send it annually. So it's going to be looking for, on properties that are leased, it's a little less specific, but, lease revenue, any expenses to the landlord. So those are really very specific questions. And it can be bothersome to people that I ask for it. But again, through the Municipal Government Act, we're empowered to ask for that information because if that's what defines market value, our assessment is market value based, then we need to accumulate this income information. So again, I keep it limited, but when it comes to something like a hotel, it's the operating business. You've got to have a viable business there for the real estate to have value. So the RFIs I send to a hotel is a much more specific, a lot more detailed to it. So as a counselor, when those RFIs go out, you probably have heard back, send them to me. I can always explain. Really, it's just to make sure I choose the right lane to market or to value that property.
We are audited by the province. We're controlled by the province. Even though we're private, we're very controlled. So there's certain levels that we have to achieve. So on the example, on the right-hand side, you'll see in the middle with a heavy line underneath it, an assessment of 384,000 and a sale of 391, which is 98%. On our overall assessment, we have to be between 95 to 105. Individually, it's not going to be that tight. It just can't be. So those are called assessment to sales ratios. And the median number is used, so the middle one. So in this example, I have given 11 sales. Some are 15% low at 85%. One is 17% high. Not uncommon at all. But the middle one is 98. So that would pass the audit, or one of the many steps they have. So when, on your budgeting side, if I have a 98% average, the province increases it by 2% to 100 for your equalization when you're paying to equalization. So I could be at 104% and they reduce your assessment 4% for that category. So when you pay equalization, everything matches at 100. The assessment straightforward, cannot be prepared with any outside influence. And we are simply acting as an extension of what you folks are, of what you are, the municipality. Now, this is one page of a report. This report is 12 pages long, and this is just the summary of it. Now that assessment to sales ratio I just talked about, in this case is 100.2%. So I have this for every subdivision in Drumheller and outside. And then I also have this for all the different house types, all the different building types within each of these subdivisions. So this is Riverside. So for Riverside, I do it for overall, and then I do it for each different type of structure within there. So it's a very detailed report, but it's a good report. It's the most accurate way of doing it. Next one is adjusted sale price to assessment. Same information before, just put on a linear on a graph. You're always going to have some high, some low. And the last one is, again, just showing on mass appraisal. Some high, some low. You know, if you're low, we don't get a phone call. If we're assessing you 20,000 high, we get a phone call. How about that? And then the next one is Drumheller, all of the residential sales in my analysis period, 428, and overall I'm at 97.6%. If I was at 94.9, I would fail. The province wouldn't allow me to give you that assessment to use for your taxation purposes. They'd send it back to me and tell me to fix it. Then the next one is the same thing, and I'm not going to go through them all. This next one is for your industrial properties, a lot less sales, obviously. And then the last one is for commercial. For commercial and central commercial and highway commercial, sorry about that. Again, not as many sales as residential. One comment first though, but if there's any questions, I really think that you folks are going to be separating your assessment to tax notices next year. If that's a go, for sure. If you ask us, we have to turn your assessments over by the end of February. If we know you're doing that, we'll have them for you by the end of January. And then you can start your process in the mailing and get that underway.
Well, thanks, Rod and Kim. That question will probably be answered by Mauricio and Daryl, but first we'll start with council. Council questions, please. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you for the presentation. Assessment and taxation is always a joy when you're a counselor. We hardly ever get any complaints about it. I guess in Drumheller, we are a bit different. I mean, every community is different. And the one thing that I try to explain to people through the mass appraisal is that it's very, very difficult in Drumheller because we have so many different neighborhoods, so many different areas, so many different types of residential buildings of various different ages and shapes and sizes, whatever. So the mass appraisal approach is to me a little bit tricky, a little bit iffy in a place like Drumheller. You brought up the idea of Riverside. Well, Riverside is probably the most homogeneous residential area in all of Drumheller. I think you would agree. So it works pretty good for the mass appraisal. But then when you get Lehigh and you get, you know, different places, they just, you know, it becomes very, very difficult. And I know you are very conscientious and you try to treat each one individually. Don't know if you have a comment to that, or I got more, but yeah. A couple of other things. I just wondering about the linear assessment of the railway. Now, you know, we have got a lease on the railway. Are they still paying taxes on that, or do we? Maybe Mauricio knows. Like, how is that assessed now that we have kind of a 1 year, 25-year lease for $1 a year? Do they still pay taxes? Do you still assess that, or I don't know?
Typically, the leasee is responsible for taxes. So if the leasee is the town of Drumheller, there would be no tax because you're an exempt.
In regards to railroad, so there's no more railroad.
You be nice. Yeah, and just a couple of other things. And again, this might be for Mauricio, is taxation strictly dependent on assessment? And where I'm going with this is that I have heard that there are some communities that are increasing taxation on derelict buildings. So the derelict building is probably assessed at a very, very low assessment. But communities have basically got tired of seeing these derelict buildings and not paying very much taxes and have actually increased the taxes. So are we strictly prohibited from increasing taxes based on the assessment? How does that work?
So assessments are used to calculate the taxes owing for each property. Uh, but yeah, to the comment that you made about uh, derelict buildings, that can be council can establish a separate subclass for those buildings, and those buildings can be assigned to that subclass, and therefore a separate tax rate can be applied to those buildings based on the subclass.
My last question, I won't take your time. I've had people comment to me that they feel their assessment is too high. And I have said, well, contact the assessor. And I have heard lots of very good stories that you are very open to people contacting you, and you will discuss their assessment, and they have been very pleased. So thank you very much for that. And so just two people who feel that their assessment is too high, contact you guys, and you'll take a look at it, right?
To answer one of your questions, if they feel it's too low, they can call us as well, and we can fix that. But the other thing, I'm sorry, can I just address one more? When you mentioned Lehigh, you're right. When you get a Lehigh or a Wayne, you don't get a lot of sales. So we're allowed a 3-year window. You don't get a lot of stuff happening in 3 years. So you look a little further back, and still not a great deal. What we will do is I'll look into a Cambria and see how it's moving, and I'll try to trend those other little hamlets the same way, because they don't stay stagnant, they will move.
Lisa.
Okay, I'll ask my question. When it comes to the railroad, there's no actual infrastructure on top that a train would actually travel on. So, and in our community, it's got Saskatchewan pavement on a good portion of it, um, with no railroad infrastructure, and least to the town Drumheller. So, if I understand correctly, a municipality is exempt from taxes on their buildings, but are they also exempt on pathways?
Any lease, get used to this yet? Any leasee is responsible for the taxes, and that applies to buildings and land.
Unless they're a municipality, or, okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I
so,
guess,
because municipalities leasing the land,
well,
and
I
we don't
totally
have to
get
pay
that,
the
but I want
taxes.
to know if the municipality has to pay taxes on that. Okay, that's the answer I
Yeah.
was looking for.
No.
For that one, perfect. And then I want to know, so I know from experience that a couple of not-for-profit museums in our community over the last, I'll say 3, 4, 5 years have been charged for accessory buildings that are still in the property of the museums, um, and just being used for storage. So prior to, they were never taxed. And when we had Barb here, it all of a sudden changed, and the accessory buildings were being taxed for these not-for-profit museums. So just wondering if that, like,
Yeah,
it seems odd to me.
yeah, me too, because if a property is a museum in your scenario,
Yeah,
and the outbuildings are being used for museum purposes, not for personal, but museum purposes, they should also fall under the exemption. Can you do me a favor
yep.
and send me off their roll numbers?
Well, I can, yeah.
Because if you give me a name, I might find 20 properties.
Okay, yeah, no,
Yeah.
perfect.
Do that.
Okay, I
And
can
then
do
certainly
that.
give me a phone call and we can discuss that.
Okay, And then just picking your brain a little bit, when it comes to the farm rates on acres, so that's farmed land, right? So busted up. Has there been any lobbying by the assessment organization to get that changed, or?
Well, not so much from us. It's more
Okay.
from the Urban Municipalities Association. Those are the groups that try to move it a bit. Because on the urban side, they feel it's not fair that the rural side is getting this break. Rurals don't pay taxes on their outbuildings if they're farmers, and this side does. So there's always a little bit of conflict between the two.
And do they not, if I remember correctly, they only pay taxes on the house, but only 3 kilometers or 3 miles or 3 acres?
Yeah. So what Lisa is saying here is, if I'm a bona fide farmer, 3 acres of that land is assessed at market value, the homestead. That's what you're referring to. They're assessed at 3 acres.
That's it, even though
Yep.
they might have 20, 30 that the homestead sites kind of sits on, right?
So
Okay, and then, and do you know if the assessments have kind of risen in Drum or if they're coming down a bit?
oh boy, I should have known that one before I came here. They did jump. They didn't drop.
Okay,
And some municipalities have gone the other way. Most are going.
okay, thank you.
Just
Appreciate it.
curiosity note, when you go to a gas station and you see a big propane tank in the back and it's Superior Propane, that gas station is paying taxes on that propane tank because the leasee is responsible for taxes. So they have to pay tax on that willingly.
Good questions, Lisa. Crystal?
My quick question is actually kind of related to Lisa's, just about the farmland that's within the agricultural district within the town of Drumheller. Is that still Wild Rose assessment or is that provincial assessment? Like I'm thinking areas in like Rosedale.
You mean just the
East.
farm parcels is what you're
Yeah.
referring to? Yes,
Yeah.
we assess them.
You still assess because
Yep.
it's in the town
Yes.
municipality. Okay.
Yeah, anything within the municipality.
Okay.
Now, we don't go ahead and re-dig to see if there's more clay than there was 100 years ago because,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Okay. And then can you just clarify, you made a comment about the market value and that you take out poor assessment that would include like divorce
Yes.
or what does that mean? I was
So,
just a little bit lost
okay,
about that.
so I have two identical houses. One is a true market sale. My wife and I want to move. We put it on the market. Century 112 sells it and it falls where it falls. The other one is grandpa dies. It's a $1 transfer to someone else. There's a divorce and it is ugly and it sells at 50% of market value because that's all she or he is going to get off me and that's it. Those we can weed out just because they skew the picture. More so if you're in Lehigh because you only have 3 sales to begin with.
Anybody else? So back to the derelict buildings. So obviously the municipality has to determine what is derelict before you could ever create the mill rate, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry,
Charles?
just gonna jump in. So, Wild Rose doesn't create the mill rate. They create the assessment.
I mean.
We create the mill rate to determine, so they would, and they have their assessment. If I'm remembering from your last presentation, so you have to assess the property at what you think it's worth. So if it's worth $20,000 in a neighborhood of $200,000 properties, it's still 20,000, right?
Yes.
And I think that's something we run up against from our residents. In fairness, they fix their property, they keep their property clean, they look after things. And then the person next door does nothing and their value is also obviously less, but their assessment's obviously less. So there's no incentive for them to, so that's up to us to fix. So we have to determine how to address that.
So
Okay.
how that would happen on our end is you would tell us, here's the 50 properties. I then apply a separate code to it so that when the assessment summary comes, it'll have its own unique code that you will identify as that type of property. So it'll be broken out separately for your mill rate.
Yeah, and our bylaw is working hard on that, and in fairness to, the bulk of our residents that do look after their property, not fair to they feel like they're penalized for looking after their property.
Well, property tax is a wealth tax. The theory is the more I can afford, the more I pay in taxes. My mortgage could be killing me, but I'm still paying a high tax because that's the way it's made.
Okay. All right, well, it's good that this information came forward. We appreciate you giving us these updates every year because it's good for the residents to see. I'm glad that you were clear that you guys are audited, you have to go through a process. Provincial government's involved in a lot of it, so it's just a good reaffirming thing that we have somebody watching over this, so thank you for that.
And what
So
made
thank
me,
you both for coming.
thank you. What made me the happiest when Tom said someone actually complimented.
It actually happens more often than you believe.
Because you don't
So,
get that on assessment
yes.
very often.
We try
I
not
don't
to
know why.
repeat what somebody says here, but I will repeat that
Oh, good.
it has happened
Thank you.
more. So, yes. Daryl, you had something to add?
Actually, I have a couple of questions. One is kind of based on what Crystal said. So if there is land in Drumheller that is zoned agriculture, however, it's not really agricultural land, it was zoned agriculture because that was the old MD at Badlands and it's never been changed. What I think we're seeing sometimes is that the taxation rate on it is still farmland, in spite of the fact the only time they see a farm animal is when it is in a trailer down the highway crossing it. So is there something that we need to do to help
Yes.
fix that? Okay.
Yeah. So on the assessment side, I can assess land as regulated, as we discussed.
Yeah.
Market value either being residential or commercial or farmland. So if it's not farm and they're not farming it, it's not farm. Let us know, and then it has to fall either as commercial or residential land, and it will substantially increase the assessment.
But in a case like that, so it's often has never been farmed, but it was zoned as agricultural land from the old municipal district days.
Send me the roll numbers, and I could do.
Okay, it'll be a big spreadsheet. So, my second question is, and I think this is more for Ken, but so you talked about sort of non-residential, the commercial industrial stuff. So does Wild Rose have anything to do with the museum or hospital or any of those facilities? Or is it just simply the sort of smaller commercial stuff that you have a hand in determining the assessed value of?
We put a market value assessment on a hospital, and so it's going to be a cost approach based value. So we do have to put a assessment on it. It's not exempt from assessment, exempt from taxes, but not exempt from assessment. So we do put an assessment annually on every school, every church, every municipal building, right? It's exempt from taxes, not assessment. So that's not a provincial responsibility. That'd be your assessment provider, Wild Rose.
Anybody else? All good? Okay. Oops, go ahead, Lisa.
So my mind's a little foggy on it, but I seem to recall that there was a provincial change in regards to linear taxes for the oil field companies. Is that still in effect? I think they were given a subsidized rate on taxes.
They never have been market value. So for an example, if, because we used to do them and now they do them. So if I go out to an oil field site and I see a compressor, a separator, and I look at the manual, it says it's $8,500. It could have cost $50,000. I'm $5,800.
Gotcha.
That's it.
Thanks.
All right. Now I think do you have something? No, go ahead, Mauricio.
Can you comment a little bit on the income approach, more more precisely on the impact COVID had on revenue of some of the businesses that are assessed under the income approach, and how coming out of COVID, how that changes the assessment?
Really, the biggest effect of COVID was hotels. That's every other property type some may have had some effect as their tenants closed down and weren't there anymore, and now there's a vacant bay in their building. So that does happen, but it was hotels, substantially hotels. Hotels, we use a 3-year period of income and, well, revenue and expenses value the income. So we use a 3-year period. So as we move forward, COVID will be the 2020 actual COVID year will be off the table for the assessments of the hotels next year. Drumheller being a tourist town, there has definitely been an increase in revenues even last year. So as we get where COVID 2020 goes off of the 3-year average, then it starts to, the assessments start to stabilize back to where they were, assuming the revenues go back to where they were. So it had a real big impact on hotel assessments for 3 years. Even this year it has an impact, but for next year's assessment, that 2020 year, which was the worst, 2021 wasn't great either, but we don't have 2020 and 2021 driving those assessments, right? So it will get, likely their assessments will increase over time, assuming their revenues go back to where they were before COVID. So those are the properties that were substantially affected, was hotels. Not even really campgrounds, but hotels. And really the strip malls were, again, we're talking income approach, means it's got to be a multi-tenanted building or it's been leased for a long term. The impact to those properties was not significant. So yeah, it's hotels, and it's getting better, and each year gets us away from that disastrous couple years. That's great about the 3-year average. It allowed the hotel assessments to drop at a time where they should drop. And it's very responsive, right? So it really did take a nosedive on the assessments, but so did the revenues. So it was a great, it was a great response that the assessments dropped, taxes dropped, and now it's coming back up again. So to me, that 3-year average is doing exactly what we want. As the hotels get better and better, the reduced assessments due to reduced revenue are going to go away.
Stephanie.
So back to the agriculture. Just wondering how you decide then, because you see cattle or animals, you see farming. Is baling considered farming? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Gone. We let you. So thank you both for coming and thank you for all the information, and it really helps us help our residents, and it's good to know, as we said, you know, if there's questions, we'll send them your way. Thank you. Good to meet you. Okay. We shall move on to 7.1.1, please, Mauricio.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be sharing my screen as I'm going to be talking a little bit about a briefing note that I'm presenting tonight. So what I'm presenting tonight is a report to Council regarding the information regarding revenues and expenses in all 3 recreational facilities, those being the Aquaplex, the Badlands Community Facility, and the Memorial Arena. Tonight's report is a very high-level report, so it will present some historical data dating from 2018 to 2022, so it's the last 5 years. And the intention is to compare how much of the expenses are being recovered through the revenue generated in the facilities. So as you can see in the Aquaplex, in 2022, we recovered 42% of the salaries, so basically personnel costs, salaries and benefits. And out of the entire expenses for the facility, the recovery was 27%. And we are using, in the case of the Aquaplex, we are using 2018 as the normal pre-COVID year. And based on our analysis, we are seeing that the facility is now recovering at what it was recovering before COVID. 2019 was not used, And it was mainly because we didn't have the outdoor pool in operation in 2019. So we felt that 2018 would be a better comparator to the 2022 year. So in total, the revenues being generated by the Aquaplex are approximately 272,000. And I have attached appendices that will provide a graphic representation of what the recovery has been in the last few years. So now we are going to be moving on to
Let's just see if anybody's got any questions on the Aquaplex one. I actually do. You've got their total revenue 2022 approximately 272, and you've got total personal costs amounting approximately 272. I think we got an error there.
Yes, so we are gonna have to, let me go to the graphs because the graphs will show you what the actual cost would be. So the revenue is around 272. So you can see it there, 271,837. Cost for wages. I do not have the amounts, I only have the percentages. So yes, I'm going to check into those numbers and I can provide further information on that. My apologies for that. Do you have any other questions?
Crystal?
Yeah, and it's the same for BCF. Revenue says 510 and personal cost is 511. So kind of the same thing as the Aquaplex there.
Okay, yes. So yes, I will have to check my numbers on that.
Tony?
I'll just comment there. So we both did this exercise and mine was very detailed from the operating budget. So yours may be an error there showing a 1-to-1 relationship, but for the pool, I've got it in at 2.42 as opposed to 1.1.
2.42, okay. One thing that I want to mention is that when we did the analysis, we didn't include amortization. So the only costs that are being presented here would be cash costs. Okay.
Sorry, you lost me there. The only
We only are including cash expenses. We are not including amortization.
okay.
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 So I'm going to go through the graphs because I know that the graphs will show you the right percentages and the revenue. So as I was saying, as you can see, the Aquaplex, we are back to pre-COVID levels. So 42% is very close to the 41% when before COVID. That's for wages being recovered. And for the total cost, 27, that's pretty close to the 28% in 2018 that we were recovering. And then when we go to the BCF, that's when we see we are not yet to the pre-COVID levels. As you can see, in 2019, we were at 643,000 total revenue. In 2022, we were at 510. So we are not there yet. And we know 2020 and 2021, those years, that's when those were the COVID years, and that's why we are so low. When it comes to personnel costs being recovered, we are at 77% in 2022 compared to 76 before COVID and 83. Tom?
Yeah, just regarding the BCF, I guess we're just lumping all aspects of the revenue of the BCF all together. So the revenue generated by the convention center, the breakout rooms for meetings, the art gallery, the exercise center, that's all put together, right?
Correct.
It would be interesting to see which aspects of that facility are maybe different than they were prior to COVID. I guess I'm just speculating that the convention area has probably recovered less than maybe, the exercise area. Anyways, I would like to see that sometime maybe.
Sure. Yes, and you are correct, Councilor Zaritsky. This would be the entire revenue for the facility. Yeah. And we have the manager of recreation. Yeah, so he can add to some information to your question.
I can just quickly comment to that if you don't mind. So with membership sales, what I did is I took some figures and broke it down in the first 6 months of the year and the second half of the year for comparison purposes. And so with membership sales in the first part of the year, we were actually at 71% of 2019. And then in the second 6 months for membership sales, we were at 101% of membership sales. The drop-in sales, we were actually up because COVID and people weren't sure about getting memberships and that yet. We were actually at 110% of 2019 for the first 6 months. In the second 6 months, we were at 120% of 2019. Where we're short is on the bookings and rental side of things. And so similar exercise that I did, I took the first 6 months. So we were at 76% of 2019. And we were at 85% of the second half of the year.
Can we just get some straight up numbers here? Cause this is a percentage, like you're saying that you have 510,000 in sales in the BCF. And yet, so what do you have, what our concern is wages. That's how this whole thing started, was the cost of wages comparative to sales. So do we have that? That's what we've been looking for all along. And I just seem like we never get what we're asking for, because that's the beef we get, is the amount of staff versus the amount of people in the facility. So is there anything here that tells us that, or Tony, have you figured it out?
Yeah. Again, I've done some extensive work off the budget that we worked off of in the fall. So the numbers at that point were 11 months ending because December numbers weren't in there yet. Mauricio's using current numbers. So although our ratios are a tad different, we both agree that the cost recovery is moving in the wrong direction overall. The salary to revenue ratio is a very important number. The salary to total expenses is a very important number. And the cost recovery is where it all ends up at the bottom. Comparing that to the RCS report that was done, you can tell that we're in the range on the expense side. So that 60% of salaries are in total expenses. Where we fall out of line is the salary to revenue figure, and that is moving in the wrong direction, which is causing the cost recovery to move with it as well. That report also identified that we have a revenue problem. The expenses are the expenses, but being that salary is such a big component of the total expenses, it has to follow the revenues. So revenues dropping versus increasing. So I think there are three key components there that need to be in a KPI. And I think they should also be included in an operating budget as an appendix. Be very helpful in kind of seeing where we're going. But the trend from 2019 to 2022 is heading down. 23 doesn't show a turnaround. So these are the things we need to revisit. Some of that revenue problem comes from, I think, what we've identified earlier, process, the ability to book underutilized spots for revenue, and we're working on that. The other thing is the marketing, I think, of the convention aspect of the whole complex is where the revenue is down. The memberships, Darren has current numbers. It appears that they're recovering and have recovered. I think it's the other revenue aspects of the building that we need to look at.
Stephanie?
I guess that all kind of ties into where I was going with it. Like, what are our plans to increase the percentage? So what are we gonna do to increase the income we have coming in? And if we can't do that, are we historically scheduling too many people on a shift? Where historically, you know, we have just say 5 people, but we only have 1 person in the building or something, and that's just every year that seems to be happening type deal. And I guess just what our plans are to, if we have plans to increase the users of all these groups, like all the things to boost our cost recovery.
Darren, would you like to comment on that?
A couple of things that affect our staffing, obviously, is cost of living increases in that. I heard you mention 1 person in the building working. From a work alone process, we don't typically have 1 person working in the building on their own, so there is always a second person with them. And when it comes to the banquet halls, the only time that we staff up for the banquet halls is if it's a late night booking, or a large conference that requires extra changeovers in that. So we do have a template that has remained consistent over the years as to we've taken a look at it and we've nipped and tucked where we could on it, but the general template of the staffing has remained consistent at our minimum levels for what we're services that we're currently providing. So
Just with computers at the front, I just heard there's difficulties when you come in and people are having issues with the computers at the front desk. Is that, yeah. So I'm just wondering, is it because we're in the process of training people so that I can give people answers on that? Just, are we training people? They're still getting the hang of things, what we've got ongoing for training for the computers up at the front at the BCF there.
thank you for clarifying which facility. So BCF, we do have we have 4 new staff that we've recently brought on, and they're still going through their training in that. So they obviously operate at a little bit slower pace. Staff haven't brought to my attention that there's a computer issue or concern, so I'll follow up with staff on that to see if there is some sort of technical issue that we're running into.
Thanks, Darren.
Anybody else? Sorry, pardon me?
Just, yeah, the numbers are not making sense to me. The percentages are not. It's just, I'm a bit confused, more than I was before I came to the meeting. So my questions, I don't even think I can ask them now. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think we're still puzzled here, Mauricio.
I do have the wages for the BCF. In 2022, 662,000. That's the total wages and benefits.
662 in 2022.
Right.
And that was the BCF, you said?
BCF, yeah.
And then we had 510,000 in income.
In revenues, yes.
And so that was just our wages and no expenses.
Right.
Okay,
That's the
those are
revenue.
the numbers we're looking for. So there's where we're concerned. So I guess That's where we gotta figure out. We know that the facilities are, you never, or not never, I don't believe in never, but I've heard for years that they're hard to balance to zero. But this is, yeah. 77%, you said, Tom? Okay, well, I think we gotta get some more information on this, because we could go around in circles, but anyways, any other questions before we move on? We'll leave this with Mauricio and Darren to break it down. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, just curious about the arena. Approximately 62% of salaries in the facilities department are allocated to the Memorial Arena. So could you explain, first of all, what is the facilities department?
Yes, the facilities department is basically a department under infrastructure, and what they do is they work at different facilities, but they primarily work at the arena. So they also work at the fountain in the summertime, and in some other areas. So they can come to town hall and do some work as well. But most of their time is spent at the arena. That's what that means.
So is that public works? Is that what we would know as public works?
Yes,
So
Tom.
of the entire public works budget, 62%?
No, facilities is one of the three groups. So public work, so within infrastructure, there's public works, which is Kevin is the manager of public works. Facilities, which is Reg Bennett as the manager, and that area has, I believe it's 5 staff total, including Reg. Unlike Kevin's area, which has 20 people roughly, Kevin. And then water and wastewater, which is Bill Adams, who has 8 or 10 people within that group. So facilities has 5 people roughly.
And 62% of their salaries basically just go to the arena.
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so to clarify too, so the facilities, when somebody comes here and fixes lights at this facility or goes to around to fix his facilities, that's what you're meaning, like all the facilities
that's
within
right.
the valley, okay.
That's right. That's why if you go further up in the Aquaplex and BCF area, a portion of that time is allocated, the third bullet under personnel costs. Maintenance, salaries and benefits, that 25,000 under BCF is actually facilities group as well.
Okay, so I guess we still aren't quite there. All right, oh, Lisa?
I just want a bit of clarification, so I'm on the same page. So are we looking for cost recovery through or by lowering wages? Or are we looking for better utilization by increasing revenue? Because it seems to be thrown around a lot that, you're looking basically at the baseline for wages, but kind of ignoring the other side of the puzzle. So I just want to make sure that I'm on the same
You're on
page.
the right page. Stephanie,
Alright.
go ahead. Oh, Tony? Yeah. Oh, well, go ahead and comment.
Yeah, it's basically a revenue problem or a utilization problem, right? So it's ways of generating additional revenue out of the buildings we already have that are underutilized when it comes to banquet rooms, ability to book parties, all of that red tape reduction kind of stuff. So if it's not easy to book, you're not going to book it. So it's a lost revenue item, which is what we need to increase to offset your basically fixed costs on the expenditure side.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but I wasn't sure because it seems like wages seem to be a big benchmark for
Well, I think with
everybody,
any,
right?
with any regular operation of any
Yeah.
business, you have to know what percentage of your payroll you can afford to carry to offset your
Which
costs.
is fair, However, if you cut back on that too much, then you lose your avenue to help increase your revenue, right?
And I think our
and-
goal is to make everything better for our community so that they have more access.
Well, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think the
Difference
answer,
is that municipalities run differently than businesses, right?
Yeah.
So I know it was hammered into my head often. The reason a municipality has the arena, has the aquaplex, all that, because we can afford the overhead. Unlike a business, they wouldn't survive regardless. We just don't have the capacity. And yet the thing is that we cut off our nose to spite our face when it comes to the aquaplex, because we have a free outdoor wading pool that does nothing for our community except give
Give
entertainment.
expenses, yeah. Go ahead, Steph.
I guess I want to see the utilization up to cover the cost of all of it, to make it look better, like, and what other communities are doing, because from what I understand, the normal percentage isn't quite where we're at.
Well, we're pretty close to the normal. Like most municipal facilities run deficits like that. Unfortunately, it's just how it is.
Yep, no, I think we still got more digging here to do, and Darren's got to figure out how, a situation like we had last week. I mean, if we're losing bookings, we can't afford to lose bookings. Bottom line is we've got to figure out how to fill that facility. And we've got the staff there obviously to do it, and nobody's sitting here saying we don't want that. What we want is as make it as efficient as possible, because we are sitting here answering to the residents. So we've got to be able to feel comfortable with the numbers and what's happening there. All right. Okay, well, we'll leave that too with you guys. All right, so let's move on to 8.1.1, please. Can I have a motion, council, please? Steph?
I move that council close the meeting to the public to discuss land development, bylaw, and policy development as per FOIP 16, disclosure harmful to business of a third party, FOIP 23.1, local public body confidence, and FOIP 24.1, advice from officials.
Seconder, please. Lisa, all in favor? Carried. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. We do have to deal with some flood stuff, so